leaked out. And then on 9th July 2019, it was obvious that Trump was completely in the loop, that he knew what was going on. Trump published a tweet in which he called the British ambassador stupid and wacky, and the scandal behind the scenes became bad enough that the British had to recall Sir Kim Derrick and nominate a new ambassador to the United States. And I mentioned this incident because it largely went under the radar. The media didn't write a whole lot about this. They kind of obscured the episode, and but what we learned from the episode, that Trump knows exactly who is maneuvering the United States into these military misadventures everywhere around the world, and causing many of these wars. And again, it comes back to Mackinder's grand strategy, and the contemptuous use of the United States as the military enforcement for the empire.
I'm never sure how much of Trump is unqualified or narcissistic, and how much is clear strategic thinking, because often I think that's a weakness in Europe. I think we exaggerate the extent. I'm sure he's very narcissistic, but the extent to which this is what dictates the policy, I think the Europeans are making a mistake. I mean, and as you said, he must know what is going on. Indeed, one of the reasons why the French and the British were all for, at the end of 2024, launching this long-range strikes into Russia, which they've known for past 3 years would be a disastrous escalation, was, they wanted to lock Trump into a war if once he took over power, or lock him into the Ukraine project. But and now, of course, they refer to him as, daddy, and this is supposed to, win him over with, by displaying our total and complete obedience. But here's the thing, that if you're in the United States, you see that Project Ukraine is failing, the war is going to be lost, it's going to be a disaster, much worse than Afghanistan. Imagine if you could unload that disaster on the Europeans. And I think this is what the Europeans are miscalculating. That is, the Europeans seem to think, the more they accept to take responsibility for Ukraine, the less burden on the US, the more likely it will continue this. But on the other hand, this makes it easier for the United States to wash its hands with it. So now it's Europe's problem. And it's same with this NATO summit. Everyone's accepting, 5% of GDP used for weapons. Of course, the Europeans are, cooking the books. They're putting infrastructure in, to bring it up to 5%. So it doesn't necessarily mean that much. But again, it's for Trump, it's, if they arm themselves to show loyalty, hoping that America won't leave us, or, daddy won't leave us, as Rutte said. Instead, it allows America to leave, because now we said all of us are spending trillions on security now. Of course, or hundreds of billions now. America can go. So I think we might be underestimating the man in the White House. But what was the European? What is the eagerness then of the Europeans to? You mentioned especially the British, to drag the Americans into a war with Iran. Is this the wider objective of keeping it in Europe, or how do you see this?
Well, it seems to me, and this is not spelled out exactly so everybody can take it into on board, but it seems to me that the British, at some point, and I think this happened when the Iron Curtain collapsed, in the early 90s, the British decided that they would try to reclaim their former imperial glory. And the first bit of evidence for this came in 1993, in a speech that Douglas Hurd, then the foreign secretary of Great Britain, foreign minister, he gave a speech to the parliament in which he said that Britain continues to punch above its weight, and that and as he said, we intend to pursue this role of, let's say, playing a disproportionately powerful role in global affairs. And then I think that, they started pushing out to their former colonial possessions to take control again. Not by military conquest, but the way they do it is they have a very, very well developed intelligence network, which cooperates very closely with the Foreign Office, with let's call it a covert side of British diplomacy. And then they also ask to have a wide network of non-government organizations, private contractors and charities that go into these targeted countries, and they develop these networks of influence, and they use money, they use diplomatic pressure, and I think that the only time, and they use also, they develop influence with opposition, with terror networks, with separatist groups and so forth. And they seek to destabilize nations in this way, and then present themselves as savior. We're going to come here to ensure peace and stability in your nation. But then you get things like Syria, because they have been trying to bring peace and stability in Syria, and we've seen what happened there. They've done, if we go back to 2012, there was this famous exchange of messages between Jake Sullivan and Jonathan Powell. Jonathan Powell was formerly chief of staff to Tony Blair. And after ending his political career for a time, Jonathan Powell created this organization called Intermediate. It was one of these private contractors, which was funded by the Foreign Office and the MI6, and had close cooperation with them. And he recruited the current Syrian president, who was at the time in prison in Iraq. So somehow they got him out of prison in Iraq, and then they cultivated him. And at that time, he communicated with Jake Sullivan, who was working for Hillary Clinton, and he told them that in Syria, Al Qaeda is on our side. So that's where we get the Jake Sullivan writing email to Hillary Clinton saying Al Qaeda is on our side, and he informed them that we have a wide network. We are in we have a relationship with all these insurgent armies in the region, and we work with them with the objective of overthrowing the Syrian regime. And in the same message exchange, he also informed Sullivan that the same operations have been put in place for Myanmar, Somalia, and Yemen. And what do these four countries have in common? That they have been at the receiving end of all these destabilizing attacks, terror attacks, civil wars, color revolutions, and so on, and millions upon millions of casualties. Just in Syria, since 2012, we've had over 1 million casualties. And one of the contractors involved, which were tasked with public relations in Syria, was called Albany Associates. And these same Albany Associates are now tasked with public relations work for the government of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is right there in the heart of the Balkans, which the British have designated as the next front against Russia. And their work, you can see the results of their work, because today, according to their polls, 60% of Bosnian people think that the greatest external threat to Bosnia is coming from Russia, exactly. So these, this is how they work. And then I think that the United States only comes into equation when the time comes to apply blunt force. You know, when you need to bring carrier strike groups, launch missiles, bring troops. And this is, I think that this is something that the American military, you know, American defense establishment understand by now. So why am I saying all this? Because I think it's not just Trump. We're not dealing with Trump's wins. And I think that whether he's a great deep thinker and a strategist is secondary. I think that the important question is that the opposition to the empire and reluctance to be constantly waging wars for the empire is much more broad-based and much more robust in the American political class and especially among American military circles than just Donald Trump. And I think that this is how we got Donald Trump in the first place, because there's a lot of people in the United States who understand that from the World War II until now, the United States has been basically used in a master blaster combination, you know, from Mad Max, where you had the master blaster was this big dumb giant with a little decrepit dwarf sitting on his shoulder, directing him what to destroy and whom to beat up. But the dumb giant didn't know why they were doing it. It was the little decrepit dwarf who was directing him all the time. And so there's a resentment for that. And I think there's a much more broad-based movement to bring the United States back to its Republican traditions, to reject the empire, and to become a regional power, a sovereign nation. And which is also why you see in the European circles this fear that the United States is going back to being isolationist, that they are not taking their global role seriously. Criticism how the United States had to be dragged into the World War I kicking and screaming, and how they came in late for World War II, and then how they withdrew from Afghanistan, they cut and run and so forth. But, you know, while certain oligarchic circles in the United States want to preserve the imperial engagements because they were the top beneficiaries from it, I think a lot of people in the army, in the military, and in the political circles understand how they have been misused and abused, and they want nothing more to do with it. So I can't say, you know, Trump doesn't come across as a great deep strategic thinker, but the effect of his policies definitely appears to be steering the ship of the United States away from the global empire.
Or just a last